The kitchen was Elias's sanctuary. Here, amidst the clatter of pans and the gentle hum of the oven, he felt a sense of control that the rest of his life seemed to lack. Tonight he was making Clara's favorite, pan-seared scallops with a lemon butter sauce. The aroma filled the air, a warm and comforting promise of a good evening. He hummed to himself, meticulously arranging the delicate golden brown scallops on the plate, a small smile playing on his lips. He was a man who found joy in the details, in the quiet, simple rhythms of a shared life. The soft click of the front door was the first sign. Then the sound of her purse hitting the floor, a sound that was too heavy, too final. Clara walked in, her movements slow and deliberate, her face ashen. The warm kitchen air seemed to thicken around her, turning cold and silent. She didn't speak, just stood in the archway, her eyes usually so full of life, now a hollow, empty gray. Elias's smile faltered. "Everything okay, honey?" he asked, his voice softer than he had intended. She didn't answer. She just held her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen, her knuckles white. He wanted to reach out, to ask her what was wrong, but an invisible wall seemed to have been built between them in the short time since he'd last seen her. His mind raced, replaying their last conversation, searching for a misstep, a wrong word, anything that could have caused this seismic shift. A single text message flashed on her screen before she quickly locked it. Just a line of blurred text and a name, Isabel. It was a fleeting glimpse, a whisper of a name he hadn't heard in years, yet it sent a shiver down his spine. The name was a ghost, a forgotten melody from a past life that had no business appearing in the present. He watched as Clara clutched the phone to her chest, her silence screaming 1,000 accusations he was not yet prepared to hear. The scallops on the plate grew cold, their promise of warmth extinguished by a shadow he could not yet understand. The silence was a thick, suffocating blanket that followed them from the kitchen into the bedroom. Elias had tried fruitlessly to salvage the evening, but every attempt at conversation was met with Clara's clipped, one-word replies. Now lying in bed, the space between them felt like a vast frozen lake. The only light in the room was the harsh blue glow from her phone, illuminating her face in a ghoulish mask of suspicion. "Who is she, Elias?" The question, when it finally came, was a razor-sharp whisper. He had been expecting it, yet the directness of it was a jolt. "Who is who, Clara?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," she snapped, sitting up and turning to face him. Her eyes, wide and unnaturally bright, were fixed on his. "Isabel. The one you've been messaging." A wave of confusion washed over him. He had not messaged anyone named Isabel. The name was a phantom from his college days, a fleeting romance that had ended amicably years before he even met Clara. "I haven't messaged anyone named Isabel. I haven't even spoken to her in a decade." "Oh, really?" Her voice was laced with venom. She thrust the phone screen toward him, a screenshot of a text message, the sender's number, a string of anonymous digits. "Ask Elias about Isabel. He never got over her." His blood ran cold. The message was a lie, a carefully crafted piece of manipulation, but the damage was done. Clara's mind had already filled in the blanks, turning a phantom into a present threat. He tried to reason with her, to explain that it was a sick joke, that someone was playing a cruel trick, but his words were lost in the torrent of her accusations. Her voice rose, raw with a pain that felt older than their marriage. "You've been lying to me this whole time, haven't you? All those late nights, all the times you said you were working late?" Her voice broke, the finality of her words a hammer blow to his heart. The chasm between them grew, a cold, empty space in their bed, a testament to the trust that had just been shattered by a name and a handful of lies from an unseen enemy. He watched her retreat into herself, her phone a shield, its glow the only witness to the silent war that had just begun. The venom of the anonymous text, once a mere whisper, now coursed through Clara's veins, transforming her from a loving wife into a meticulous, paranoid investigator. The name Isabel became her sole focus, a haunting presence that eclipsed all else. Her once vibrant personality was replaced by a hollow shell of suspicion and distrust. The light that once shone in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by a cold, calculating gaze. Elias's pleas, his desperate attempts to console her, were met with an unnerving silence. He felt as though he was arguing with a ghost, a woman he once knew but who was now a stranger. The space between them was no longer just a cold bed, but an entire universe of unspoken words and shattered trust. In the dead of night, while Elias slept, Clara would begin her work. Her laptop became a portal to a world of digital shadows. She learned to scrub through browser histories, to track Elias's GPS movements through a shared app, and to cross-reference his friends' social media accounts for any mention of the name that haunted her. She even began to secretly follow him, parking her car down the street from his office, watching his every move with a hawk's eye. Her heart would pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of her own unraveling. The world outside her own fear became a blur. Her work suffered, friendships faded, and the home they had built together became a sterile environment for a deranged game of cat and mouse. Her descent was meticulously documented in a worn leather journal, hidden beneath the loose floorboards in their closet. The pages, filled with her looping, frantic script, were a chronicle of her psychological breakdown. Each entry detailed a new piece of evidence, a new theory, a new suspicion. It was here, in the dim glow of a small flashlight, that the reader gets a glimpse into her past, a single, chilling entry that mentions a family betrayal so profound that it shattered her trust in every close relationship. The words were simple, yet they hinted at a deep, unhealed wound. He promised he would never lie to me, but they all do. It was in this journal that the true motive was revealed, a deep-seated fear of abandonment and betrayal that turned a fleeting whisper into a consuming obsession. She was not just a jealous wife. She was a wounded soul, and her pain was about to transform into something far more dangerous. The silence in the house was no longer a sign of peace. It was a tense quiet, heavy with unspoken accusations. Elias had spent the last week walking on eggshells, his every move scrutinized by Clara's cold, calculating eyes. The woman he knew was gone, replaced by an unseen watcher who tracked his every step. It was this unnerving feeling of being watched that led him to the closet. He was looking for a pair of old shoes, and as he reached for a box on the top shelf, his hand brushed against a loose floorboard. It lifted with an unsettling ease, revealing a small, worn leather journal hidden in the dusty space. A cold dread settled in his stomach. He knew instinctively that this was the source of her strange, obsessive behavior. He carried the book to their bed, the very place that now felt like a battleground, and began to read. The pages were a chilling chronicle of his last 2 weeks. His coffee order on Tuesday, the exact time he left the office on Wednesday, the name of the colleague he had lunch with on Thursday. It was all there, a meticulous record of his life as seen through a lens of paranoia. But it was the final entry that stopped his heart cold. It wasn't a log of his movements, but a chilling plan, a list of steps to prove his betrayal and expose his lies. He saw his own name written next to a list of places he had never been and people he had never met. The words felt like a physical blow, and he read them again, his mind reeling. He wasn't just being watched. He was being framed. The silence of the house pressed in on him. The only sound was the frantic rustle of the pages as his hands trembled, turning them over and over, as if they might contain a different, less horrifying story. The weight of the truth settled on him like a stone. The ghost of Isabel wasn't just in Clara's mind. It was a character in a drama she was writing, and he was the unwilling villain. The love he had always taken for granted, the trust he had believed was unbreakable, was nothing more than a fiction. He felt trapped, manipulated, his life no longer his own. He closed the journal, its pages a record of his wife's descent into madness and his own terrifying reality. He knew he could not confront her directly. The danger was too real, too close. He had to find a way to get ahead of her plot before it was too late. He had to act. The next morning, Clara was a portrait of manufactured calm. She hummed as she made coffee, her movements precise and effortless, as if the turmoil of the past few days had never happened. Elias, still reeling from the contents of the journal, watched her with a newfound fear. This version of her, so unnervingly serene, was far more terrifying than the one consumed by rage. He could see the gears turning in her mind, the meticulous execution of her deranged plan. As he left for work, He saw her on the phone, her voice a low, urgent murmur. She didn't meet his eyes, just waved dismissively. She was speaking to Ben, a private investigator and a family friend. She had chosen him specifically for his loyalty and his blind trust in her. Her voice was smooth as she wove a web of lies, her words a carefully constructed narrative of a betrayed wife. "Ben," she began, her voice quivering with feigned vulnerability. "I'm so sorry to call you about this, but I don't know who else to turn to." She paused, letting the silence hang heavy with implied pain. "It's Elias, I think he's seeing someone. A woman named Isabel." She whispered the name like a secret, a final hook to reel him in. The conversation was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She painted Elias as a cold, distant husband, a man who had suddenly become a stranger. She told him fabricated stories of late nights and hushed phone calls, of a love that had inexplicably died. Ben, a decent and trusting man, listened with growing sympathy. He heard the pain in her voice and believed it was real. He didn't question the suddenness of her suspicions or the strangeness of the situation. He just heard a friend in distress and a plea for help. Clara's voice was a siren song, luring him into a dangerous game he didn't even know he was playing. The description is of a quiet suburban kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the window, an idyllic scene that masked a sinister act of betrayal. She hung up the phone with a slow, triumphant smile. The first piece of her plot was in place. Ben was a man of his word, and his loyalty to Clara's family ran deep. He had agreed to her request, not because he believed Elias was unfaithful, but because he saw a friend in pain. He began his investigation, a simple task he assumed, a few hours of research to calm her anxieties and prove Elias's innocence. He started with the basics, running a background check on Elias and then, reluctantly, a search for a woman named Isabel. He found no record of a relationship, no shared addresses, no social media connections. It was a dead end. But a good private investigator knows that a dead end is often the first clue. His unease, a small nagging feeling at the back of his mind, began to grow. The more he searched for Isabel, the more he found nothing. It was as if she didn't exist in Elias's world at all. His unease turned to suspicion when he decided to look into Clara's past. It was an unusual step, but her desperation and the strangeness of the situation compelled him to dig deeper. What he found sent a cold shiver down his spine. The past he uncovered was a twisted web of manipulation and emotional betrayal. He found old police reports from a decade ago, a restraining order filed by a former friend, a detailed account of a similar incident from her college years. It was a pattern, a series of calculated events designed to control and isolate the people she claimed to love. The documents told a story of a woman who had, on more than one occasion, used a fabricated person or event to gain sympathy and control. He found evidence of her fabricating text messages, just like the one she had shown him, and creating anonymous email accounts to harass people from a safe distance. The narration follows Ben's growing horror as he pieces together the puzzle. He wasn't just a private investigator anymore. He was an unwitting detective in a psychological thriller. The case was no longer about a cheating husband. It was about a deeply disturbed woman and the sinister plot she was building around her unsuspecting spouse. The description is of a quiet office, a single lamp illuminating a stack of files, each one a damning piece of evidence that proved Clara was not the victim she pretended to be. Ben stared at the file, the name Isabel scribbled on the top. He knew now that his investigation had to take a different turn. He wasn't looking for a person. He was looking for a ghost. Ben's investigation had turned from a simple favor into a chilling obsession. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, and his suspicion about Clara's motives had grown into a grim certainty. He had traced the name Isabel to Elias's college days, a small detail gleaned from an old friend who remembered the short-lived relationship. Armed with a name and a city, Ben began to dig deeper, searching for a woman who would have been in her early 30s. What he found was not a woman, but a gravestone. The search results led him to a small, unassuming article in a local newspaper from 7 years ago, detailing a tragic car accident. The victim's name, Isabel. She had been on her way home from work, a life cut short in an instant. The narrative reveals the horrifying truth. Clara had known about Isabel's death all along. She had found a college yearbook in a box in Elias's study years ago, and a casual mention of Isabel's passing in an old email to a friend had been the seed that planted itself in her tormented mind. The ghost she was chasing was not a rival, but a carefully selected victim from Elias's past, a woman who couldn't defend herself, a name she could use to build her twisted fantasy. Clara had been feeding on a lie for years, nurturing it, turning it into a phantom that now possessed her completely. The description is of a cold, desolate graveyard, a final resting place that held a truth far more disturbing than a betrayal. Ben stood there, the biting wind rustling the dry leaves at his feet, staring at the name carved into the stone. Isabel's grave was a dead end in more ways than one, a stark, silent monument to a life that had ended long before Clara's jealousy had even begun. The truth in this desolate place was undeniable. There was no affair, no secret lover. There was only a grave and a woman's calculated malice. Ben knew he couldn't go to Clara with this. He had to go to Elias, for he was not just her husband, but her next victim. Ben stood on the doorstep, the file clutched in his hand, a look of grim determination on his face. He knew he had to speak to Clara, to give her a chance to explain before he went to Elias. He found her in the living room, a blank stare on her face as she watched the news. The soft glow of the television illuminated her vacant eyes. She was a woman teetering on the edge of a precipice, and Ben knew he had to act fast. He placed the file on the coffee table, a single damning piece of evidence that contained a truth far more horrifying than a betrayal. "Clara," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I know." She didn't flinch. Her gaze remained fixed on the screen, but her knuckles turned white as she clutched the remote. "I don't know what you're talking about, Ben." Her voice was a flat, emotionless monotone. He opened the file, revealing the photo of Isabel's gravestone, the newspaper clipping about her death. "She's dead, Clara. She's been dead for 7 years. I know you knew." And then the dam broke. The blank stare was replaced by a torrent of rage and grief. The remote slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. "He betrayed me," she screamed, her voice raw and filled with a pain that was both old and new. "He lied to me. He promised me he wouldn't." She was no longer talking about Elias and Isabel. She was talking about her past, about a trauma that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. In a torrent of raw emotional dialogue, she confessed it all. The anonymous messages, the stalking, the meticulous journal entries. It was all part of a plan to frame Elias. Her voice dropped to a low, chilling whisper. "I was going to find a woman, someone who looked like her, and pay her to disappear. I was going to stage her death and then plant all the evidence on Elias. He would have to suffer, just like I did." She looked at Ben, her eyes wide and pleading. "Don't you see, I had to. He left me with no choice." Ben stared at her, horrified by the depth of her delusion, the horrifying scale of her planned crime. The truth was not just about jealousy. It was about a psychological unraveling. A mind that had been so broken by a past betrayal that it could only see the world through the lens of its own pain. Her confession was a terrifying glimpse into the abyss of her psyche. Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her madness. She had been building a plot, a story that she intended to be their new reality. And now that it had been discovered, she had nothing left. She had been caught and her game was over. Elias answered the door to find Ben standing there, his face a mask of grim concern. He invited him in, the air between them thick with a tension Elias couldn't yet understand. Ben didn't waste time with pleasantries. He handed Elias a file, its contents a collection of documents that would shatter his world. As he read, the meticulously compiled evidence, the background checks, the old newspaper clippings about Isabel's death, the damning records of Clara's past manipulative behavior, the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The quiet, unnerving silence of the past few weeks, Clara's irrational jealousy, the anonymous texts, it was all a lie. A carefully constructed fiction designed to ensnare him. The narration follows Elias's journey from confusion to understanding, a brutal descent into a truth he never imagined. The woman he loved, the wife he had built a life with, was not just jealous. She was a master manipulator, a woman whose fragile mind had been so scarred by a past trauma that she had chosen to live in a world of her own making. The betrayal wasn't about an affair. It was about the very foundation of their marriage, which was built on a lie. Every moment of shared intimacy, every gentle touch, every promise of forever was tainted by the knowledge that Clara had been planning to destroy him. He looked at Ben, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and heartbreak. "She planned to frame me for murder," he whispered, the words barely audible. Ben nodded, the gravity of the situation a heavy presence in the room. Elias was confronted with an impossible choice. He could protect Clara, a woman who was clearly suffering from a psychological breakdown, a woman he had once loved with all his heart. Or he could seek justice, not just for himself, but for the life she had so casually planned to destroy. The choice was not between right and wrong, but between love and justice. He knew that whatever he chose, his life would never be the same again. The truth was out, and it had left a deep gaping wound in the heart of their marriage. Clara sat on the couch, the same place she had sat so many times, watching Elias enter the room. This time, however, there was a difference. The gentle smile was gone, replaced by a cold, hard stare. The love that had once filled his eyes was now a mix of heartbreak and disbelief. He didn't come to her, didn't sit beside her. He stood in the middle of the room, a chasm of silence and accusation between them. The house, once their sanctuary, was now a tomb. "Ben told me everything," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "He told me about Isabel. He told me about your plan." She flinched at the sound of the name, but her composure held. "He's lying," she said, the words a desperate, trembling whisper. "He's in on it with you. You're both trying to—" "Stop," he cut her off, the single word a sharp command. "Stop lying. It's over, Clara. I read your journal. I saw what you were planning to do." Her carefully constructed facade crumbled, her face contorted in a mask of pain and rage. "Why?" she sobbed, the question a desperate final plea. "Why did you have to love her more than me?" "I didn't," he said, the pain in his voice finally breaking through. "I never loved her. She was a ghost from a past I had forgotten. But you brought her back. You made her real." The dialogue was a brutal, honest exchange of their shared tragedy. Clara confessed to everything, her words a torrent of self-pity and misplaced blame. She talked about a past betrayal, a wound that had never healed, a pain that had festered and twisted into an obsession. Elias listened, his face a grim mask of acceptance. He no longer saw a wife. He saw a stranger, a woman consumed by a darkness that was beyond his understanding. The final confrontation was a dance of two people who had once been one, now separated by an unforgivable lie. The description is of a silent house, a single lamp illuminating two people who were once lovers, and were now just two strangers, bound by a terrible, shared secret. The conversation came to a halt. There was nothing more to say, no more lies to tell. The truth had been revealed, and it had left nothing but a gaping void. Elias looked at her, his eyes filled with a grief so profound it was almost tangible. He had to make a choice. He had to decide whether to turn his back on the woman he loved or to risk his own future for her. The choice was not easy, but the alternative, living a life in a cage of her lies, was a price he could no longer afford to pay. The sound of the sirens was a final, piercing note in the symphony of their broken life. Elias stood in the doorway, a silent witness as two police officers led Clara out of the house. She didn't look back. Her face, a mask of grim acceptance, was a final image he would carry with him forever. The neighbors, drawn by the flashing lights and the hushed whispers, stood on their lawns, their faces a mix of shock and morbid curiosity. The rumors would begin to swirl immediately, weaving a new, fictional narrative around the tragedy that had unfolded in their seemingly perfect home. The narrative follows Elias's decision to press charges. It was not a choice made out of anger, but out of a grim, unwavering commitment to the truth. He knew that for his own sanity, for his own survival, he had to see this through to the end. The emotional toll was immense. He spent days in a state of emotional numbness, a heavy, suffocating silence that had replaced the vibrant life he had once shared with Clara. The love he had felt was now a hollow, echoing chamber in his heart, a constant reminder of a love that was built on a foundation of lies. The description is of a cold, sterile courtroom. Elias sat alone, a solitary figure in a sea of strangers, listening to the legal jargon that would decide the fate of his wife. The truth had been laid bare, a public spectacle of their private tragedy. When the judge delivered the verdict, a quiet, final sentence, there was no cheer, no relief, just a profound silence that settled over the courtroom, a final, somber note in the tragic story of their marriage. The silence that followed her sentencing was a testament to the heavy cost of truth. Years turned into a quiet blur. Elias had moved, sold the house, and left behind the life he had built, a life that was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. He now lived in a small apartment overlooking the city, a solitary figure in a sea of unknown faces. He was a changed man, the man who had loved with his whole heart, now a cautious, weary soul. The world, once a place of warmth and comfort, had become a place of silent suspicion. He no longer trusted easily, no longer opened his heart without a second thought. The betrayal, like a physical scar, had left an indelible mark on his psyche. The final chapter is a somber reflection on the nature of love, betrayal, and psychological torment. It is a testament to how a husband's trust was weaponized, and how a wife's jealousy transformed into a shocking murder plot. Elias often thought about Clara, not with anger, but with a profound, aching sadness. He wondered if she had found peace, if she had come to terms with the dark corners of her mind that had led to their shared tragedy. He knew that her actions were not born of malice, but of a deep, unhealed wound. But understanding did not erase the pain. It was a cold, quiet grief that followed him everywhere. The final scene shows Elias alone, sitting in his apartment, the city lights twinkling below like distant, indifferent stars. He holds a single photograph, a faded picture of him and Clara on their wedding day, a lifetime ago. They are smiling, their eyes filled with a hope and love that was so real, so tangible. He runs his thumb over her face, his heart aching with a truth that could not be unlearned. The echoes of her jealousy, the memory of her betrayal, the sound of the sirens, they all lingered in the silence of his apartment, a constant reminder of a love that was poisoned by a secret. He would live the rest of his life with those echoes, a man forever haunted by the woman he once loved.